at the Holmes Run Acres work group members from the community were Arvidas, and I've never said his last name before, so I'm hoping I don't mispronounce this. Barzdukas, David Heckman, Edith MacArthur, Keith Gardner, Sarah Jablin, Nancy Garone, and Matt Harris. And the ARB and History Commission members that participated in the work group were Samantha Wong, Kate Orr, Elise Murray, Barbara Peters, and Sue Kovac-Schumann. And then Christopher Daniel and John Burns. Chris is the current chair of the Architectural Review Board, and John Burns is the former chair of the Architectural Review Board, and they both have come and presented to the work group. So thank you very much for all of your efforts for this study. As Supervisor Gross was unable to make it tonight, she was at the in-person meeting last Tuesday, though. So just a little primer of how to use the Microsoft Teams functions. We're going to recommend that you type your questions directly into the chat function, and somebody will be, the staff will be reading those aloud and then answering them. If you want to raise your hand to verbally ask your question, there should be a button on the top right corner. Sometimes different versions of the app put it in different places, but just look for a little bubble and you click on that and a dialog box should open and you can type your question into that. Or raise your hand and somebody will unmute you and you can ask your question. Then we're going to take questions in order received, and we're going to hold questions until the end of the presentation. For call-in people, I don't know if we have any callers on the line, but if you press 1, you'll get a list of all the available options, command options on your keypad. If you press star 1 to get the list, star 5 to raise your hand and lower your hand, and then star 6 will unmute you, or staff can unmute you as well. So, and as a general reminder, if you do have access to your mic, please keep yourself muted just to cut down on background noise. And at the question and answer period, I'll go over those instructions again. So to start with, what is a historic overlay district? It's a zoning tool used in promoting the general welfare through the identification, preservation, and enhancement of those buildings, structures, neighborhoods, and landscapes, places and areas that have historical, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. They are a historic overlay district is officially designated by the Board of Supervisors to prevent encroachment of new buildings or structures and additions that are incongruous with the visual and historic character of the district, to promote upkeep and rehabilitation of older structures, educate residents and encourage preservation, and to ensure new development within the district is appropriate. The Architectural Review Board has purview over the historic overlay districts. They review building permits, site plans, and zoning actions to ensure new development within a district is appropriate with the historic character. They collaborate with the homeowner on design of the proposal to ensure that it is compatible with the historic character of the district. And they review and approve the design guidelines, not the Board of Supervisors, although the design guidelines are included in the staff report to the board. So a little background about the study. At the time of the board authorization, it was the Holmes Run Acres was located in the Providence district. It's now in the Mason district with redistricting. In 2019, the Holmes Run Acres community petitioned then Supervisor Linda Smith to initiate the research for a feasibility study of the historic overlay district for Holmes Run Acres neighborhood. The petition showed that 72% of the homeowners supported this research initiative. As a result, on January 24th, 2020, the Board of Supervisors directed Fairfax County staff to consider the possible establishment of a historic overlay district for Holmes Run Acres. The study area for the proposed district consists of the property shown on the map. The board requested that staff's evaluation include analysis and recommendations on the historic and architectural significance, as well as the boundaries for the potential historic overlay district. In addition to the potential comprehensive plan amendment, staff will also be drafting a potential zoning ordinance amendment, as well as a rezoning application for the addition of the historic overlay district if approved by the Board of Supervisors. The report analysis will include the significance of the district, current conditions, character defining features, contributing and non-contributing properties, the boundaries, and the zoning ordinance recommendations. So existing conditions, there were a total parcels that included in the study area were 366 that staff considered. Total acres in the study area was approximately 145. The site is currently developed with single-family detached housing, with the exception of Woodburn Elementary, Loria Park, and Holmes Run Acres Recreation Association, which is a private community recreation center. The adopted plan for the area recommends 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre, and the entire study area is zoned R3. There is no change recommended to the planned land use or density being proposed. Included in the study area are the parcels shown in the crosshatch area for the potential inclusion in the historic overlay district boundary. These parcels were excluded from the National Register boundary, shown here in yellow. These include the homes on the southern portion of the Executive Avenue, just north of Gallows Road, the homes on Gallows Road adjacent to the Woodburn Elementary School, the parcel adjacent to Woodburn Elementary School owned by Fairfax County Public Schools, and the parcel adjacent to and owned by the Holmes Run Acres Recreation Association. Zoning Ordinance Article 3, subsection 3101.3, Establishment of Historic Districts, states that to establish a historic overlay district, the board must determine that the proposed district possesses historic, architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance. According to the National Register of Historic Places nomination, the Holmes Run Acres neighborhood consists of approximately 140 acres and is comprised of approximately 350 modern-style suburban single-family dwellings constructed between 1951 and 1958. The developers, brothers Gerald and Eli Loria, created a subdivision with affordable houses that took advantage of the natural terrain by blending homes into the surroundings. The Lorias hired architect Nicholas Satterley and Donald Lethbridge to design small, inexpensive houses consisting of standardized features and modules that made the buildings adaptable. They designed the houses to be affordable, quick to construct, and sited in harmony with the natural topography and landscaping. Influenced by the principles of Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian dwellings, the architects designed the houses in a modern style, featuring open floor plans, plywood panels, fixed glass, and sliding windows at a time when ranch and colonial revival styles were much more popular in most of the nearby suburban communities. The modern design of the dwellings included large windows on the primary facade, shed or low-slope gable roofs, and prominent brick chimneys. The dwellings were sited at an angle on lots to provide maximum privacy for the homeowners. Holmes Run Acres was added to the County Inventory of Historic Sites in February 2nd, 1977, the Virginia Landmarks Register in December 6, 2006, and the National Register of Historic Places on March 22nd, 2007. Listing in all of these registers is an honorary designation and offers no preservation protection. So as I stated before, the board authorization came in January 2020, authorizing the study. And we all know what happened in March 2020. COVID sent everybody home and readjusting to the new reality. But in the meantime, field work began because we could be outside and conducting our surveys of the properties. The first work group meeting was held in September 2020. And since then, we went through some staff changes, but all in all, we held 15 work group meetings with the work group since September 2020. During that time, the work group reviewed the defining features of the neighborhood, reviewed and discussed contributing and non-contributing properties, and went through multiple drafts of the design guidelines. And staff conducted site visits, researched potential boundaries, contributing and non-contributing properties, then of course collaborated with the work group. And as I said before, the staff's findings and analysis, the preliminary findings will include the HOD boundaries for the rezoning to add the overlay district, contributing and non-contributing properties, a comprehensive plan amendment, and a zoning ordinance amendment. So when reviewing exterior projects requiring building permits in an existing historic overlay district, the Architectural Review Board uses guidelines for new construction, the exterior alteration of existing buildings, structures, and sites located within the historic overlay district based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. These standards are written into the zoning ordinance regulating all historic overlay districts. The standards embody two important goals: the preservation of historic materials and the preservation of a building's distinguishing character. Every building is unique with its own identity and distinctive character. Character refers to all of those visual aspects and physical features that comprise the appearance of every historic building. Character defining features or elements include the overall shape of a building, its materials, craftsmanship, decorative details, interior spaces and features, as well as various aspects of the site environment. The work group has been helping staff to identify those features or elements that give the district and the buildings within the district its visual character, and that should be taken into account by the Architectural Review Board in order to preserve them to the maximum extent possible. Here is a list of character-defining features that staff found in the National Register nomination for homes for acres: curvilinear road layout, siding of the dwellings on the landscape, modern architectural design, windows and prolific use of glass on the primary facades, materials such as wood, brick, and brick veneer, distinctive roof shapes, and large brick chimneys. And here are some of the characteristics and significant features that the work group has identified, which are fairly similar to the characteristics identified in the National Register nomination, such as the landscape, the orientation of the house on the lots, the mid-century modern style, materials such as wood siding, and the roof shape again, and then the large picture windows. Staff considered the following in determining whether a property was recommended as contributing or non-contributing. And of course, we started with the National Register nomination as for whether the National Register nomination determined contributing or non-contributing. Then we considered whether the property had been modified since the National Register nomination. Was the modification completed during the period of significance? If it had been modified, did it still retain its defining characteristics as determined by staff? And if, again, if it had been modified, did the modification diminish the historic integrity of the building according to the Secretary of the Interior standards? As I said, staff evaluated 366 parcels total. We determined to recommend 343 parcels to be included in the boundary, recommend 285 contributing parcels, and 58 non-contributing parcels. So the homes on the southern portion of Executive Avenue were excluded from the National Register boundaries, and staff continues to recommend their exclusion, along with the 3 homes adjacent to Woodburn Elementary on Gallows Road. The Fairfax County Park Authority properties were not all identified in the National Register boundaries, and staff recommends their inclusion as contributing. The Fairfax County Public School properties, there was one parcel that was included as contributing in the National Register boundary, and then one parcel that was excluded from the boundary. Both parcels, staff is recommending for exclusion in the proposed Historic Overlay District boundaries. The Holmes Run Acres Association, 2 parcels, one was included as contributing and one was excluded from the National Register boundaries, and staff recommends that both are included as contributing. There was one outlot for a non-contributing house, which was excluded from the National Register boundaries, and staff, it is non-contributing, and staff recommends that it be non-contributing. And one outlot that was excluded, that was contributing, and from the National Register, and staff recommends that it be included as contributing. And there are 10 houses that have undergone alterations significant enough that staff recommends changing their status from contributing to non-contributing since the National Register nomination was completed in 2006 and 2007. The comprehensive plan is required by state law to be used as a guide to decision-making about the national and built environment by the county's Board of Supervisors and others such as the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals. It is also a guide for county staff and the public to use in the planning process. The current language in the comprehensive plan notes the listing of Holmes Run Acres community on the Inventory of Historic Sites, the Virginia Landmarks Register, and the National Register nomination. The proposed updates will be mainly editorial and will add the designation of Historic Overlay District if approved by the Board of Supervisors. I am now going to turn the mic over to Lily Yagazu from the Zoning Administration Division to speak to you about the zoning ordinance amendment. And Lily, I'll just advance the slides.
Thank you. Good evening. As Denise mentioned, I'm Lily Yagazu with the Zoning Administration Division. I will go over the zoning ordinance amendment and rezoning components of the study. In addition to the comprehensive plan amendment, an amendment to the zoning ordinance and a rezoning application is required to establish a historic overlay district. The zoning ordinance amendment would establish an HOD or historic overlay district, and it will impose specific regulations that will be applicable to properties within a potential historic overlay district. The Holmes Run Acres neighborhood is currently zoned R3, which is residential district, 3 dwelling units per acre. Excuse me. The lot and development dimensional building dimensional standards for the R3 underlying zoning district include a maximum of building height of 35 feet for single-family detached dwellings and 60 feet for all other principal uses. It requires a minimum setback in the front of 30 feet, 12 feet on each side, and 25 feet in the rear. As proposed, the draft zoning ordinance amendment would limit the height for all principal structures to 35 feet, matching the existing height limit for single-family detached dwelling structures in the R3 district. In addition, the establishment of a historic overlay district would require that certain improvements within the potential historic overlay district boundary be subject to ARB review. Certain building permits that are related to exterior alteration, new construction, addition would require ARB review and approval, whereas other discretionary reviews or zoning applications like special permit, special exception, rezoning, variance would require ARB review and recommendation. This is in the current zoning ordinance, and it would be applicable to any area that is established as a historic overlay district. Since historic overlay districts are also considered zoning districts, the establishment of a historic overlay district will require the board to approve a rezoning application to put this overlay district on top of the underlying zoning district and update the official zoning map. Next slide, please. In the proposed zoning ordinance amendment, there would be additional regulations and restrictions, as I mentioned earlier. The zoning ordinance consists of use regulations and development standards that all properties within a specific zoning district, including those within a historic overlay district, must meet, such as building permit, as permitted uses, setbacks, building height, among other things. Properties can be developed and used by right if they meet all the requirements of the zoning ordinance. If they do not meet the requirements, then that's where either the special permit, special exception, variance would be applicable. An overlay district may further restrict certain underlying zoning district regulations, such as building height. That is what is being proposed at this time. That will be applicable to properties located within the overlay district only. So if additional restrictions that are proposed as part of this overlay district analysis would not be applicable to other R3 zoning zoned properties. It would only be applicable to properties within the HOD. ARB review and approval is required before a building permit can be issued and applied to exterior renovations, new constructions, or demolitions. ARB review is not required for interior alterations, deeds, or covenants as shown on the table on the screen. The ARB then will use the recommendations provided in the draft design guidelines in evaluating any proposed new construction or exterior alterations within the potential historic overlay district. The draft design guidelines consist of guidance and recommendations that property owners and design professionals can consider for compatible design of new buildings, additions, and exterior alterations. With that, I will let Sarah Vonish from Traceries provide additional information on the draft design guidelines. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily.
Okay, and I have to stop sharing my screen so Sarah can share her screen.
Okay. Denise, can you tell me what screen you see?
I can see the presenter screen. You're good.
Okay, great, thank you. So hi everyone, again, I'm Sarah Vonish. I'm a historic preservation specialist and project manager with EHD Traceries. I'm here tonight to present an overview of the draft design guidelines for the potential HOD. Here is the agenda for our presentation. Just going to dive in. Just for background, Traceries is a small DC-based historic preservation consulting firm. We provide a wide range of professional services to both governmental agencies and private clients And our services include archival research, survey and documentation, evaluations, regulatory compliance, and historic preservation planning. We've been working with the county for about 3 years now, updating the existing historic overlay district design guidelines, as well as preparing new design guidelines for the latest HODs, including Wellington at River Farm and Holland Hills. From the outset of the project and our larger project, updating the existing design guidelines has been to create user-friendly design guidelines for use by applicants, staff, and the Architectural Review Board in order to promote the preservation and rehabilitation of homes within the neighborhood and other HODs, all the HODs. So, as I mentioned, working on updating the existing HOD design guidelines, as well as preparing general design guidelines for all HODs. So the Holmes Run Acres design guidelines has been coordinated with that effort to provide users and the board with a consistent outline and format to aid in the review of projects. So as part of this effort, we first reviewed existing documentation, including the materials collected by the community and posted on your website, as well as the National Register nomination and other materials. We then performed an on-site survey to inform our understanding of the neighborhood's characteristics and to illustrate these characteristics in the design guidelines with the treatment recommendations. We worked with staff and attended regular work group meetings, presenting drafts along the way and revising them based on the feedback we received. And tonight we're here to present the latest draft, updated in July, and it should be posted on the county website for everyone's review if you haven't seen it already. Moving forward, we will continue to refine and revise the design guidelines based on the feedback we've received from the community, and then ultimately from the Architectural Review Board. The guidelines are intended to be a comprehensive document providing background on the historical and architectural significance of the community to inform decision-making, provide practical guidance to facilitate review of future projects, and recommendations for appropriate treatment strategies based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation that maintain, strengthen, and enhance the mid-century modern character of the community. It's important to note that the design guidelines are recommendations only. They are not requirements and are not part of the zoning ordinance. Additionally, if the HOD moves forward, the guidelines are approved by the Architectural Review Board and not the Board of Supervisors. So again, the design guidelines provide recommendations, not requirements. They are intended to support the community's continued evolution while preserving the character-defining features that make it so special. They are not meant to be absolute or give case-specific advice or address unique conditions. And sometimes a creative and thoughtful design solution that doesn't necessarily meet all the written word of the design guidelines may result in a better project and will be approved by the ARB. So what's in the draft design guidelines? Here is an overall outline of the document. I'm not going to go through the document in detail. I'm going to really focus on the design guidelines section in chapter 4. But just so you are aware how it's organized, chapter 1 includes a brief introduction of historic overlay districts, what they are, what they entail, what the project review process is, and what the purpose of the design guidelines that we just talked about. Chapter 2 provides background on the development history and a discussion of the community's significance and why we're here preserving it, trying to preserve it. Chapter 3 provides an overview of the district boundary, the HOD details, so the boundary, the contributing and non-contributing resources, as well as an outline of all the character-defining features that Denise just presented. It also includes a section on the different house plans found within the neighborhood and the key characteristics of those plans that make them unique to their own group. And then chapter 4 includes the design guidelines, and then there's an appendix with additional resources, as well as a full list of contributing and non-contributing resources. So as we've talked about, the HOD regulations and the zoning ordinance identify 12 review standards used by the ARB. These incorporate the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which were developed by the National Park Service and are considered the benchmark for appropriate preservation practice nationwide. They're used in local jurisdictions around the country, like in Fairfax County. And they provide a general framework and the key principles that apply to historic buildings of all periods, styles, types, materials, and sizes to help preserve the distinctive character of the building and the site while allowing a reasonable change to meet contemporary needs. And here are the standards on the screen. I'm not going to read each one individually, but they're also in the design guidelines. So the guidance in chapter 4, it's organized based on 3 general project types. First, the guidelines for preserving architectural character, which apply to existing buildings and projects involving the preservation of existing buildings. The second group is guidelines for architectural compatibility and neighborhood cohesion. And these guidelines are for new construction and new additions within the neighborhood. And then the third group is guidelines for preserving setting, which addresses the topography, landscape, and archaeological features. Within each section, guidelines are shown as either recommended or not recommended. And work treatments that are consistent with the review standards that we just looked at are considered recommended or are classified as recommended, and those that are inconsistent with those standards are not recommended. So the first section within those groups provides guidance for repair and maintenance of existing homes. They are broken down by building elements and features such as roofing, wall materials, windows, garages and carports, as well as guidance for improving accessibility and sustainability. They are consistent with the standards, and they outline a treatment hierarchy beginning with basic repair actions and progressing as needed due to deterioration or damage to replacement in kind, which means to replace the material or feature with a new one that matches the original in appearance and ideally materiality. The guidelines do acknowledge that the mass-produced and prefabricated materials originally used in the neighborhood by the developers may not be the most durable and may not be available anymore. So replacements with an appropriate alternative may be necessary. And in that case, the replacements should match the original as closely as possible. So the second section provides guidance related to the design of new construction and additions. It's intended to help project applicants design compatible new construction that complements the existing neighborhood character. Per the Secretary of the Interior standards, new additions or construction should be compatible yet differentiated. This came up a lot in our work group meetings. And what this means, it's somewhat subjective, and we've had a lot of discussion, but in terms of compatibility, any additions or new construction should be complementary with the existing, especially in the massing, size, scale, and overall modernist character. And differentiated does not mean inharmonious. Instead, it aims to distinguish the old from the new to protect the prominence of the original building and original materials. There are various techniques to differentiate the new form from the historic. They could include slight variations in materials or fenestration patterns, or by incorporating small hyphens to separate masses. But again, it doesn't mean incompatible or inharmonious. So the final section addresses the landscape and streetscape. As you know, the natural character of the development, including the topography, the parks, the paths, woodlands, street patterns, and especially the relationship between the buildings and their surroundings, was all carefully planned by the developers and the architects, and strongly contributes to the setting and distinct character of this neighborhood. So this final section includes recommendations for things like landscape design, fencing, and privacy screens, as well as driveways. It also provides some information on how to appropriately approach archaeological resources if they happen to be discovered. So we touched on this in the beginning, but to recap, the guidelines are intended to be a comprehensive document and a guide for owners and occupants, design and construction professionals to learn about the history and significance of the neighborhood, see photographs of character-defining features and original house designs, understand the ARB review process, to learn more about recommended and not recommended treatments for future projects. And they're also used by the ARB as a resource when they consider potential impacts of proposed projects on the historic and architectural significance of the neighborhood. And just to reinforce this point, the guidelines are recommendations, and ultimately the ARB makes decisions on a case-by-case basis depending on the project and site-specific considerations. So with that, I will turn it back over to Denise.
Thank you, Lily and Sarah, very much. I'll share my screen again. Okay. So, as we've stated before, ARB review and approval is required before a building permit can be issued and applies to exterior renovations, new construction, or demolition within a historic overlay district. ARB review is not required for interior alterations, and existing renovations can remain in the historic overlay district. And of course, the underlying zoning remains in place, which is R3. ARB review and recommendation is required for any site plan or rezoning, special exception, special permit, and variance application within the historic overlay district. And here is a list of things that require a permit and things that do not require a permit. So for instance, new buildings, additions and structures, porches and decks, sheds and playhouse over 256 square feet, swimming pools, retaining walls over 3 feet, new exterior stairs, and demolition of buildings and structures. And of course, this is not a complete list. Please visit the Land Development Services webpage for a complete list of when a building permit is required. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Godfrey to talk to you about the county facilitated poll on behalf of the Holmes Road Acres Civic Association. And Sarah, I'll just advance the slides if you tell me to. Sarah, I think you're muted. Thank you, Grace.
I'm sorry. I was on my whole spiel, and thank you for mentioning that. Okay, let me back up, rewind. Sarah Godfrey, let's talk about the poll tonight. If you have not heard, the poll is open. It opened on Monday, and the intention of this poll is for everyone who lives in the neighborhood, lives in the potential HOD boundaries, to weigh in on whether or not you support the potential HOD. So if you can go to the next slide, Denise. And I will run through the questions, but just a note before you can get to these questions on the poll site, we provide all the background information, many of the details that we just went over. There's links to maps, more information, anything you might be looking for. It is kind of a hub of everything you might need to know about the HOD so you can be informed before you respond to the poll. So That leads me to this first question, which is where we want to gauge how informed you feel. And that's just helpful for us to know in terms of how well we are communicating, making information accessible, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. And then this is the second question: do you support the establishment of an HOD for homes or acres? I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. And next one. So this third question goes into gauge if you would be comfortable with additional height restrictions. Lily can speak more to the details of that, but currently homes, if an HOD was adopted, homes would have a 35-foot height restriction. And they currently do still as well, but if you would be interested in an additional height cap for making that 25 feet tall, that's where that comes in. So Lily, did you want to chime in on that, or?
I think you said it right. It's there's staff had received recommendations to maybe look at further restricting the height from the current allowable 35 feet to maybe 25 or some other height that is in line with the original height for the neighborhood. That is something that's going to require additional analysis, something that maybe could be considered in the future. But this question is added in here to gauge the community and see if there's support for additional restriction. The 35-foot limitation on all principal structures, matching the current 35 feet limitation for single-family detached dwellings, is currently proposed by staff and will be included in the zoning ordinance amendment if the HOD were to be established. But this is in addition, would the community want to see additional height restriction in the zoning ordinance in the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Denise, if you can go to the next slide. All right, so the final point is the comment box. So if you have any additional thoughts, things that you would want to voice, concerns, anything, you can feel free to put those in the comment box so we can take a look at those. And then next slide. All right, so the postcard, and actually go ahead and go to the next slide, Denise. Okay, so you hopefully have seen the postcard in your mailbox over the past few days. This I think started hitting mailbox at the beginning of the week, but this is just to give everyone information about the poll. And then, so this is the front. Denise, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so as you can see, the deadline for the poll is September 9th. And there is a QR code. There was an issue with the QR code, but please use the URL that's listed on the postcard. And then we will be doing an additional postcard that will be mailed out just to help ensure that everyone gets this information. That will be hitting mailboxes the week of the 29th. And yep, you can also request a translated version of the poll or a paper poll if that's what you prefer. Okay, next slide. All right, so I've gone over some of this. A few things we do have when you take the poll, your name and your Homes Rent Acres address will be required. And in addition to that, to help us vet all the entries and responses that come in, we also have an IP address blocker as well. So there will be one vote per IP address. And then I think paper ballots will take a few days to turn around, and all results will be reported we're targeting October for the results to be reported out on. And this little timeline kind of goes over, we had the community meeting last week, and now this one is open, closes September 9th, and the results will be in October. I think that's it. Next slide.
Thanks, Sarah. I think the next slide is mine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, yes. So this is the study timeline. This is revised a bit from the timeline that was presented at the 26th. Actually, it's just embellished on. There's no difference in any of the dates. The poll is open, as we said. Staff will be presenting their draft findings to the Architectural Review Board and the Park Authority Board. Staff presented their preliminary findings to the History Commission last night. These meetings are open to the public. However, there will not necessarily be an opportunity for public comment. At this point, this is an informational item only. Staff will make their final recommendation to the board in January when the staff report is published. And the poll results will be included in the staff report to the board. There's a tentatively, we're planning for the Planning Commission and board public hearings for February and March. And then, of course, the Board of Supervisors makes the ultimate decision on whether to institute the historic overlay district or not. Most of these dates are, the early dates are pretty firm. The January, February, March dates are a little looser, so they could change depending on lots of things. So, and that's it. So I just want to go over again how you can ask questions. You can use the chat function and add a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and just use the raise the hand function. You'll be unmuted by staff and you'll be allowed to ask your question and we'll respond. If you can try to remember to unraise your hand, to lower your hand when you're done with your question, that helps us just know who's really in the queue. And then for callers, if you press *5, that will raise your hand and we'll know that you have a question and we can unmute you. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Denise, I just saw in the chat that people might have had a hard time hearing me. Is my audio not sounding good? Or is it okay?
Gosh, so when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see anything, so I apologize. Let's see. I heard you. Oh, somebody. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I lose the screen when I share my screen. So, okay. So, I think Megan and Grace are going to be helping me field the questions. Do we have a question? Yes.
We have lots of questions coming in the chat.
Great. Thank you.
And I'm just going to go in order. What is the amount? This is from Diane and Chris Park. What is the amount of time expected for the ARB to review a plan and give approval? Does the board require a knowledgeable / professional person to deal with the board, thus creating expense for the homeowner?
Sure. Well, for most uncomplicated projects and smaller projects, it's usually a 1 to 2 month process. We do have a few Architectural Review Board members on the call tonight, and I'd welcome them to turn on their cameras and answer this question as well. I don't think that it's necessary to enlist an architect unless there is specifically a complicated project, a larger building project. For some of small decks, a general contractor can usually produce it. So it just depends. I guess it just depends on the complication of the project. So, oh, Mr. Burns, so I think, Mr. Burns, I think you can unmute yourself. Yeah. So John Burns is here and he's going to answer the question. Thank you.
Oh, good evening, everyone. I'm John Burns. I am currently a member of the ARB, and I am a past chair of the ARB. In terms of how long does it take to get approval? As Denise pointed out, a simple thing can go through quite quickly. To get on the agenda for a specific ARB meeting for an action item, you need to have your application filed with the county 2 weeks prior to the actual ARB meeting. ARB will consider things for action during a meeting, and if there's consensus among the ARB members that it's approvable, you can get a positive vote. So it can be as short as 2 weeks. However, it sometimes can take longer than that. If you are doing say an addition or a fairly substantial change to the exterior of the property, I have to acknowledge that in Virginia, residential design does not require an architect. So a contractor can do a presentation, but in coming to the ARB, you were talking to design professionals, people who are experienced in this sort of thing. And it's very, very helpful to have someone who is able to articulate the design, its features, and why the applicant believes that this is in compliance with the guidelines. So, it's a large investment in an addition. You do not need an architect, but you do need someone who's able to articulate what you're trying to do and convince the ARB that it is the appropriate design for your particular programmatic needs. There's another possibility, and that is if you want to talk to the ARB conceptually. We're thinking about an addition. We want to put the addition here, and you can come and talk in what's called a workshop session. That requires 1 week advance notice to file a presentation. And you can come and you talk informally. You do not get a vote. You get to listen to the ARB members who can comment individually on your proposal. And you can do that as a means of getting an idea of whether or not your idea will fly without expending a huge amount of money. You will ultimately, to get ARB approval, you will need to submit drawings that are suitable to file for a building permit. And that yes, you do have to spend some money to get that done. But it can be a multi-step process if you so choose. Do a workshop 1 month, figure out what you want to do, come back the next month for action. And it's possible to do that way. And it's also possible that the ARB will turn you down, in which case you need to come back for a second month. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, John. Okay. So, Megan.
We currently don't have any hands raised, so
Okay,
Grace
great.
I'll let you guys know when I see a hand.
Thank you.
But
yeah.
For now, we just proceed with the chat.
This next question comes from Richard Archambault from Briartuck Court. Hi, Denise, Sarah, and panelists. Thank you for your presentation. I'm sensing a major disconnect between the public engagement portion of your project and the needs of the residents to be heard and respected in the development of the design guidelines. In discussion with other community members, there is a rough consensus that the guidelines, quote unquote, need work. I've heard this sentiment both pro and anti-HOD individuals. However, HOD working group members have reported that after numerous rounds of feedback, they resigned from the HOD committee because no substantive changes were ever made to the guidelines. If the HOD working group members were unable to provide input that resulted in substantive change after many meetings, why should we expect a different outcome from tonight's feedback? And there are 3 more questions. Do you want me to read them all at once or answer?
Are they grouped together with the design guidelines or? Or are there 3 more questions from that person?
3 more questions from that person.
Okay, why don't we just take the first one? So, so as far as the design guidelines go, it is my perception that the design guidelines have gone through several iterations, and they have been substantially responded to from community input. There are things that that we're really not able to change because the design guidelines need to be based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So as I said, that the purpose of the guidelines are the purpose of the standards are to preserve character defining features and historic materials. And that's what the design guidelines are responding to in this as applied to for Holmes Run Acres. So and let me just say that there are still opportunities to give input on the design guidelines. The design guidelines aren't adopted by the Architectural Review Board until the Historic Overlay District is approved by the Board of Supervisors. So there still is opportunity to give input onto the design guidelines and to and for the design guides to respond to that input. But there are some limitations about what specifically we can change, because this is the point of the Historic Overlay District is to preserve the character of the district. So I hope that answered your question.
And
Denise,
the
the
person who
gentleman-
has asked this question has also raised their hand to speak.
Oh, okay,
I'll make them a presenter.
sure, thank you.
Richard, you should be able to unmute now.
I think I am. Oh, apologies, amateur mistake. I think I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, you are.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Denise. That is a very good, a great explanation that has not been given to us until tonight. And follow my logic here. If I go back to the survey that was done in 2019, when we asked to have a study for the HOD, we became locked into these guidelines without disclosure to the community that they existed.
So, okay, so the design guidelines at that point didn't exist. There's something that was developed, but the Architectural Review Board, per the zoning ordinance, needs to develop design guidelines for each historic overlay district.
Sorry.
And
So, yeah,
yeah.
to clarify, to even begin an HOD process, we would have been largely locked into the Department of the Interior guidelines that have not changed, that
Right.
then form the ARB guidelines. So the point I'm trying to make is that several years ago, we should have been informed that there was a framework from the Department of the Interior that guided this process, and we were not. So I think
Got it.
very important for everyone on this call to understand that what we see as, and I hate to use this term, but it's the one I've got on the tip of my tongue, as a bait and switch is due to poor consultation at the start of the project. We began this with a community discussion about massing, and now we are looking at aesthetics. It is very different, and that's the root cause. We've identified that tonight. I think that's important. So that's it for my comment. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for that input. Yes, so as I said, those standards are actually in the zoning ordinance for the historic overlay district. So that the study that we've conducted included developing design guidelines based on those standards as per the zoning ordinance. Thank you so much for your question. Grace, I see some, oh no, the hand raise, okay, there we go.
The next question is from Jennifer Sigler. How do the current guidelines control massing in the acres?
So Sarah, can you speak to that? Now, keeping in mind that, that there's a building envelope that's allowed by the zoning ordinance, and the ARB cannot, influence that building envelope that's allowed by the zoning ordinance. But there are ways of subtly designing buildings and additions that can make the massing seem less overwhelming. But I'm going to be quiet now and let Sarah speak specifically to the design guidelines.
Sure. So also a goal with these design guidelines was not to be prescriptive and give any specific standards for height or size, square footage of an addition, really acknowledging that each lot in the neighborhood, there are a lot of differences. There is a lot of change in grade, different lot sizes, different home sizes. So the massing is covered in the design guidelines, really in relationship to the existing homes and the existing homes in the surrounding area, recommending designing additions and new construction that are modest and relate to the 1- and 2-story existing houses that are there. And so it's general, talking about the current, what's the current character of the neighborhood and the homes, and how can a new addition be massed to be compatible with that existing character. And obviously this is then used by the ARB when they're reviewing a project and looking at the massing in relationship to your specific property. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
We have a hand raised. Let me, from this commenter, let me make presenter. You should be able to unmute now.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, it sounds like the reason that we're not allowed to control massing in a clear and objective way is because that's not the way that HODs are written in the zoning regulations or something related to zoning. But we started this whole project to control massing. And now we've got all of these guidelines that don't control massing. And it seems like the one thing that we care about is going to be left up to subjective opinion, which you never know what you get from that. So is there any way to just control massing in a really clear way rather than like load us down with all of these other things that we didn't want to start with?
Right. So the historic overlay district is, it's it is a thing that has a particular set of things that we have to go through for the zoning ordinance, and as we just talked about, the design guidelines must follow the Secretary of the Interior standards. There's no, and I'm going to let Lily speak to this, but I don't believe that there's any way of specifically just controlling massing without an overlay that, because you can't control you'd have to control massing across all R3 districts. But I'm going to be quiet now and let Lily specifically answer that.
So the zoning ordinance has building development standards like height, setbacks that kind of dictate the envelope in the massing of structures on each property. Those are different depending on the zoning district a certain property is located in. For example, the height limit for the R3 zoning district is 35 feet for detached single-family residences, but the setback is different It is, I mentioned earlier, 30 feet in the front, 12 feet on the side, and 25 feet. If you go to the R2 zoning district, which has larger lot sizes, the setback is slightly bigger. It's 15 feet and 40 feet in the front, 15 feet on the side, and 25 on the rear. So these development standards are set. They're strict. They are not flexible without having to go through either a special permit or a variance if, for example, you need to encroach into these setbacks. And for height, definitely it would require a variance, which also includes you have to demonstrate the property's physical hardship in order to be able to apply and maybe secure a variance approval. The reviewing body, which is the Board of Zoning Appeals, would have to make certain findings in order to approve that variance.
Yet,
From what we have seen, but if I may finish, I'm just getting to that point. This neighborhood, what's unique about this neighborhood, one, in addition to its architectural characteristics, is that it is small in scale, in mass, but that contributes to what makes it architecturally unique neighborhood. That architectural unique characteristic is protected by applying the historic overlay on top of the existing or underlying R3 zoning district. Otherwise, these properties are very much similar to every other R3 zoning district in the county. And so in order for us to apply additional restrictions on this specific neighborhood, we have to look at what's unique about that neighborhood. And so the historic overlay district is how we get to apply these additional restrictions, including the requirement that they go before the architectural review board when projects are proposed. Otherwise, if we are looking at just limiting the height, it would be a zoning ordinance amendment. Would that be very, how would we make this neighborhood different than the rest of the R3 zoning district without applying the architectural characteristics and the unique features? I hope that is clear, but that's why we're going with that's the tool we have in order to preserve this neighborhood and protect the massing. Now, the ARB has this guideline to use when projects come in. It would be case by case. It's not uniform. If we were to apply the height limitation, for example, let's say there's a question in the poll, as I alluded earlier, that it is based on comments that we have heard that additional massing restriction is desirable in this area. That's why we're trying to gauge the community. But let's say if we reduce the height limit to 25 feet for all structures in this neighborhood, we reduce the setbacks further, and we limit the overall envelope of what can be built on these properties, then there is no flexibility if, for example, one property could potentially meet all these new height and setback restrictions, but another one cannot expand or cannot add to it without having to go through either a variance, which requires the findings that I mentioned earlier, or a special permit or a special exception in order to not meet the zoning ordinance amendment. But if it's the design guidelines that guides what could be built, it could be interpreted case by case to make sure that what is being proposed is in line, compatible, and respectful of what we're trying to protect in this neighborhood, while at the same time allowing property owners to expand and use and enjoy their properties in a way that will not potentially create massing and impact that's gonna, impact the neighborhood. So that's, it may not have been very clear when I made my presentation earlier and tried to touch on the difference between zoning ordinance and design guidelines. The design guidelines are intentionally flexible so that the outcome of that process going through the ARB process is going to result in an addition, new construction, or alteration that will still preserve, the overall massing and character. In terms of square footage, if you look at the numbers, it might be bigger, the house, but it's still not going to impact the neighborhood in a negative way. That's what we're trying to address. But if it's in a zoning ordinance, you would have to keep in mind every time you want to deviate from what these additional restrictions that are put in, you would have to go through a process that is a lot more expensive in terms of time and application fees and process as well.
Right. So I think what you said about like, this is the tool we have is kind of the key thing in there, because the tool that the county has isn't really suited to what we initially expressed to the county as our primary concern. And that was zoning, the massing. And if that was in the zoning regulation and an HOD went way beyond zoning regulations and then ultimately doesn't even touch the zoning regulations, going back to what Richard said, it does feel like a little bit of a bait and switch, where our concern about massing was clearly the primary concern at the beginning of this process. But then the county still jumped to an HOD, and I don't think that it was clear to most of us that we're actually not going to solve the massing problem in any sort of objective, clear, regulated way, but we are going to get all of these other restrictions on our homeowners' rights, basically.
If I may clarify, when I say the HOD regulations, the establishment of the HOD itself will have a zoning ordinance amendment component. So the HOD cannot be established without the regulations we're proposing being included in the zoning ordinance. So it's not completely separate from the zoning ordinance. The design guidelines are also a requirement that are clearly stated in the zoning ordinance. But if I remember correctly, when this process started, and Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, the direction from the board was to do a feasibility study whether an HOD is feasible or not. And that's why we're moving with the analysis of a potential historic overlay district. That's the initial board matter that directed us to look at the feasibility of an HOD, with the understanding and an acknowledgement of the unique characteristics of this neighborhood that is intended to be preserved. And so the preservation tool is the creation of an overlay district that is a historic overlay. There are other overlay districts. This one fits in within a historic overlay district. So the direction from the board was to look at the neighborhood, look at the history, and see if a historic overlay district establishment is feasible or not. Now, in this process, if it's very clear that it is not feasible, there is I think Denise's timeline showed earlier, we're still going through the process. There's an opportunity at the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors public hearing to provide additional input and let the board know that, either the HOD is feasible or not based on the analysis that is done. Staff was directed to study it, and based on our professional expertise and experience, we will make a recommendation, but that does not mean the board is going to go with staff. They may or may not take staff's recommendation, but they will make a decision at a public hearing. So that is where they would want to hear from the community and from everyone, whether they're in support or not, or if, the HOD was completely not what was intended, there will be an opportunity to let the board know. Staff only makes a recommendation based on the research and analysis that we have done. And then it would be a decision that the board will have to make. I have seen in the comment that, it's not predetermined. That's why we're going through this whole public outreach process, including the poll. And then the upcoming public hearings will be very important to let the board know what the community thinks.
We also have
Thank-
Elise Murray on the line, who I think is probably.
Yeah,
also
yeah,
has some
yeah.
further
Thank you so much.
information.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you so much, Lily. That's a very good, very clear explanation of the process and how you can weigh in and voice your opinion. Elise, thank you. Can we hear you? Can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
You're very quiet though.
Well, I am very quiet. I think, Lily, that what somebody needs to address is what Fairfax County can do within Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia's legislation and other guidance. The county is a Dillon rule, is a Dillon rule state. So the county doesn't have unlimited power to do anything at once. So how much of these massing issues really come down to property rights of the individual owner? Because I think that is really the gist of the question. And is legally, can the county do anything about it? That is my point for whoever can answer it.
Yes, I am not an attorney, but
Mhm.
I will acknowledge Virginia is a Dillon rule state. Most of the regulations that we can implement in the zoning ordinance is directly passed by the state, and the state will either, give us an authority to implement certain regulations or not. It's unlike, home rule states, we're very different. We're Dillon rule, so we can only do what the state specifically allows us to do. Having said that, we do have the authority to limit height. Like I said, even in this zoning ordinance amendment, we are proposing to limit height to the extent that we feel is appropriate in this neighborhood, because the current zoning ordinance does allow a maximum height of 35 feet for single-family detached structure, which most of the properties within this neighborhood is developed with detached single-family structures. However, there are other properties that are not developed with a detached single-family residence, so they could potentially go up to 60 feet. And so we see that as something we can regulate. And if, let's say, again, I'm going to use the school, even though we're not recommending it be included in the HOD boundary, but let's say the school were to be included in the boundary and they wanted to build up to 60 feet, they would need to go to the variance process in order to exceed that 35-foot height limit. But our concern is limiting it further than or lower than what is currently allowed for all other. This neighborhood is not the only one zoned R3. There are thousands of properties and neighborhoods that are also zoned R3. So taking out this neighborhood only in limiting its height, I think that may also not be equitable. I did see maybe going down, we'll see another question about equity. So we want to make sure that what we're implementing in certain neighborhoods within that have the same zoning district designation are treated the same way, except that this one is architecturally significant, and if the finding shows that it needed to be protected, the HOD designation is the most flexible yet impactful way of protecting the characteristics that have been identified.
Thank you, Lily.
Yes, thank you, Lily.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yes, thank you.
So this is the equity question. It is from Dean Johnson of Friar Tuck Court. Adopted in 2017, One Fairfax is a joint racial and social equity policy of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and School Board. It commits the county and schools to intentionally consider equity when making policies or delivering programs and services. It is a declaration that all residents deserve an equitable opportunity to succeed, regardless of their race, color, sex, nationality, sexual orientation, religion, disability, income, or where they live. To that end, have the county HOD committee and associated consultants apply the lens of One Fairfax. Have the county HOD committee and associated consultants applied the lens of One Fairfax during its proceedings. Has Carla Bruce, Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County, been consulted and included in such discussions? And should we expect any report regarding the evaluation of equity per the One Fairfax policy to be shared publicly? Equity wasn't even mentioned once in the county staff report to the board for the proposed Holland Hills HOD.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question. It's something that is definitely on my mind. We have not specifically addressed equity to this point, either in our discussions with the work group or in the preliminary findings. We weren't specifically charged to either. So the board gave us, specific charges to study, and that is what our study has included. Up to this point. But I am aware of the One Fairfax policy. At this time, the comprehensive plan amendments, and as far as I know, and Lily can chime in on this for the zoning ordinance amendments, there is not a process for considering equity in those studies. So at this point, the answer is no. We have not specifically looked at equity in this planning study.
We have another hand up. Go ahead.
Who is it? Do you have a name?
Jennifer. The hand went down and then back up.
Jennifer
Or is that a
Sigler?
residual? Yes.
It wasn't me.
Oh, your hand is still raised, Jennifer.
Oh, that might be what it is.
My bad. I'll take it.
Proceed with
Thank
the
you
text
for
questions.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
The next question is from Jennifer Clark. What deems a property non-contributing and what are the implications? What is expected of the homeowner if their property is non-contributing?
Right, so non-contributing properties are typically properties that have undergone renovation or sometimes complete demolition, but mostly have additions or sometimes major material changes that the character defining features and the materials have changed so much that they no longer contribute to the overall character of the district. and that's why they're not contributing. That being said, the non-contributing properties are still within the historic overlay district, and they would still be required to come to the architectural review board for any building permit or the other site plan for recommendation and rezoning if for recommendation. So a building permit that affects the exterior of a non-contributing property would still come to the architectural review board for review and approval.
And the next question is from Kevin Young. Sarah Vonish stated tonight that the guidelines are recommendations and not requirements. The June 9th Architectural Review Board meeting minutes state the following, quote, Mr. Daniel appreciates the response to comments and has indicated that in the National Register nomination includes the front doors are not prominent, which was the intent with the architecture for Holland Hills. Mr. Daniel does not support the prominent entrance and cannot support this as presented, end quote. If a recommendation from Holland Hills guidelines is being referenced to deny a permit from moving forward and board approval is required for a permit, how is this recommendation not functioning as a requirement?
One thing, if I remember correctly, one thing that I would point out is that if I'm remembering correctly, that project actually did pass through the Architectural Review Board. So the Architectural Review Board is made up of 11 members that I saw John Burns' hand go up, which is why I chuckled. But I do think what Mr. Daniel was referencing there was the National Register nomination as a character defining, the front entrance was a character defining feature, and therefore he could not support that the addition. So, Mr. Burns, I'm going to let you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, I cannot speak directly for Mr. Daniel. However, I was in that meeting, and like Mr. Daniel, I voted against that particular project, not specifically for the same reason as Mr. Daniel. And I don't think that situation that was quoted by the person who submitted the question is really applicable to any other property in Holland Hills, much less in Holmes Run Parkway or Holmes Run Acres. Sorry. Each property is unique. I noticed, I believe, Sarah in her description tonight said that the properties are often angled so that you have some privacy. You don't always look into your neighbor's house directly. That's the same thing in Holland Hills. And because of that, not every house can get an addition in exactly the same place. The houses are not in neat, orderly rows, so everybody knows they have exactly this many feet on the left side or the right side or in the rear. What was voted on in Holland Hills, it was a close vote, if I remember right. It passed by 5-4, which is an unusually close vote in Holland Hills, or excuse me, on the ARB. But I wouldn't take that one thing out of context and make that apply, attempt to make that apply to the similar reviews, potential reviews in the Holmes Run Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Yeah, so, oh, yes.
Do you want to answer first, or do you want me to unmute now?
Well, no, that's okay. Go ahead. Jennifer,
Jennifer, I think you're already a presenter. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you. I think the point of the question was not that particular case before the ARB, but the fact that if we go to the ARB and the ARB chooses not to recommend our design to the county, then the county will not give us a permit. And so effectively these quote unquote guidelines function as requirements.
Well, I think the guidelines are there for the Architectural Review Board to help them analyze your project and whether your project, how impactful your project might be to the rest of the community. So yes, the Architectural Review Board does have the authority to deny a project, a permit, and they work very hard with homeowners to try to get to an approval. Recently, the votes have been close. With Holland Hills, as Mr. Burns, there have been a couple of close votes, but they are an 11 member board, and they all do have their own perspectives that they bring to the projects when they're reviewing them. So yes, and each case is decided on a case by case basis. And Mr. Burns has his hand up again, so I'm going to yield the floor.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, decisions by the ARB refer back to the guidelines, but it's not one guideline that generally rules. Generally, it's an accumulative assessment of the impact of all of the guidelines. There are the 10 standards that Sarah quoted from the Secretary of the Interior. Then there's also interpretive documents that are available from the State Historic Preservation Office, from the county, and from the National Park Service on how to apply those standards. But the ARB takes those guidelines and looks at the overall impact of the proposed work on the historic character of the property and its impact to the broader community. So it's not just one thing. It's the cumulative impact of the proposed changes. And so does that in the end become a requirement? The requirement is you need approval to get your building permit, but it is not one individual guideline that dictates that approval or lack of approval.
That does make it, though, even more subjective than I previously mentioned, where the guidelines themselves are not very, regulatorily strict, I guess, if you will, in terms of their language and the clear cutness and objectivity of them. But also now it's to be interpreted by 11 people who, as you say, have disagreed a lot in the past few cases. And so this could potentially lead to a lot of expense for homeowners who they're not sure how 11 architects would interpret their design vis-a-vis the guidelines, and that could then mean multiple meetings and multiple payments to their architect or contractor. It gets really unpredictable.
If I could comment on that, it's not just one thing. And by the way, the board has a diversity of members. There's a lawyer, there's a landscape architect, there's an archaeologist, and a historian. Lisa's the historian that represents the History Commission on the ARB. So it's not all architects. And there are a variety of opinions about things. But the idea in the end is that you get a group of knowledgeable people making a decision as to whether or not the proposal is reasonable given the historic character of the community and the individual house that's being considered, and evaluate it and make a decision in that broader context. It's a consensus thing. And oftentimes these votes are quite clear. Maybe one or two people would object for an approval or a disapproval. And towards the comment that it's subjective because you can tell that because there's been close votes, I think the ARB, my personal opinion now, this is not an ARB assessment, is that the ARB is trying to figure out how these guidelines apply in the particular case of individual houses in Holland Hills. Some of them have been quite clear cut. Others have not. They've required discussion among us, and we've actually, I think, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to discuss how we're applying these guidelines to make sure that we're applying them consistently with particularly attention paid to the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. This is a new district. It's new for the ARB to review it, and obviously it's new for the homeowners in that district as well. I don't think the county did a really good job, or the ARB did a really good job in rolling this out in the Holland Hills community. I would hope that lessons learned, that there will be much more discussion with the community about how you actually go about applying, how you actually, what's it like? And if you're interested in that, next Thursday night, the ARB is meeting, and I do believe we've got a Holland Hills thing on the docket. Is that correct, Denise?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you can see it in action. You can see the discussion. You can see the individual board members, how they react, and I think that's a good way of learning. If you really want to know what it's like to go to the ARB, come to one of the meetings. Very simple.
Right, and the other point to tag off of that is that for the past 2 years since the pandemic, the Architectural Review Board meetings have been recorded. And I know that several members of the community have commented to me that they have watched the recordings. So that's another way of gauging how a typical review goes. But yes, next Thursday evening at 6:30, and if you just Google Fairfax County Architectural Review Board, you'll be able to get to the meeting information, and it will be virtual. So
We have another hand up. I'm going to make them presenter. Okay, Kevin, you should be able to unmute now.
Sure, can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to point one thing out, and I have watched these meetings, and on April 14th, even though, John, you were saying that it's always an amalgamation of a bunch of rules being violated, you denied a permit for the Zapata residents based on one particular guideline, which you quoted by page. So the point I'm trying to draw here is that recommendations are requirements depending upon how the board feels. So the statement that recommendations are not requirements, I believe, is false.
So again, I think the point is that it is an accumulation of things. I'm sorry, I don't remember that particular permit. But it is a case by case basis. It's looked at each project is looked at comprehensively, and it's looked at to see the overall impact to the structure and to the historic district. Thanks for your comment.
Our next question in the chat is from Diane and Chris Park. Did you say 2 months for something small like a deck?
Actually, I think we have decks come through very often. They just apply, and it can be 2 weeks. So as Mr. Burns alluded to, the Architectural Review Board process is the application is due for, if you're applying for approval, the application is due 2 weeks before the meeting date. So if you get your application in by that Thursday, in 2 weeks, you can often have your approval by that meeting date. Decks are typically pretty simple. It's a simple approval process and a simple review process.
The next question is from Jeanette Chu and Keith Ketterer. What is the process to stop further consideration of an HOD? Can this be stopped dead in its tracks? Yes or no?
So this is a process that was implemented by the board, and staff will continue to write their staff report. We're bringing the community, the Architectural Review Board, the History Commission, and the Park Authority Board the preliminary findings at this point. In a few weeks, we'll start to write our staff report. And as I said, in January, there's the intention to publish the staff report. So this process will continue until we get to the board, who will make the ultimate decision. And I see Mr. Burns' hands up again, so I'm going to yield the floor again.
Thank you, Denise. I can tell you the experience we had in Holland Hills. We had people on the working group. I assume it's similar at Holmes Run Acres. Some people were in support of it. Some people were against it. Some people were vehemently against it. And in relation to the comment about equity, both sides were represented on the working group in Holland Hills. But you have to recognize this is a political process. The community petitioned their district supervisor. The district supervisor, and with enough, apparently, enough votes that the supervisor felt it was politically viable and went forward, got the Board of Supervisors to direct staff to do this report. Can it be stopped dead in its tracks? Absolutely. If you can convince your new supervisor that this is not in the best interest of the community, and a substantial number of the community say, we don't want to go forward with this, it won't go forward. I mean, it's a political decision. You all have the vote, you who live in this neighborhood. Just like with the poll, everybody gets one vote. And in this instance, you can talk to your supervisor. If the community has changed its mind, the supervisor is not going to take it to the Board of Supervisors without the community support. In the case of Holland Hills, with the Supervisor Stork, he was cagey, and he made it clear it was not going to be 50% plus one person that would be politically expedient. We got, I think in the end, we were up in the 70+ percentage of the community members voted in favor of that. And that was basically as a result of the poll at the very end. Get out the vote. If you want it to go one way or the other, make sure people vote.
The commenter, I believe, is requesting to speak, so I will make them a presenter. Go ahead, callers.
Are you looking
Yeah.
at Jennifer Ziegler?
Yeah,
No,
Jeanette
hi.
Chu, and then there's a second name there. I just can't see.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Jeanette Chu and Keith Ketterer, that's the K. We're the ones that raised the question about whether or not this can be stopped, so thank you for your responses. So forgive me, I'm a little confused. I understand this is a political process, and the way to stop it is to get to our supervisor and express the view that we don't want this. But we've also been told that while everyone is encouraged to vote in this poll that you all are administering for us, that the poll is non-binding. So basically, you don't have to listen to what we say on the poll. So why vote? Why have a poll at all if that's not how, if you're going to disregard the poll results and we should be talking to the supervisor instead, why would we bother with this poll? The poll is meaningless.
So as I said, the poll results will be incorporated into the staff report, which will go to the board. And it's my understanding that Supervisor Gross was in the community meeting last week, and Supervisor Gross specifically indicated that she will be looking at the poll results. I would recommend that every property owner vote in the poll.
But, again, it's been made very clear to us that this poll is non-binding. That means this poll is 100% waste of our time. And frankly, all of your time and Supervisor Gross's time. So I don't understand the point of the poll. And I asked a very simple question. Yes or no? Can we kill this? Can we stop this? If so, what is the mechanism by which we stop it?
I think that you can, as Mr. Burns was saying, that you can express that opinion to Supervisor Gross. And if there is enough groundswell, then probably this will not move forward. The poll is there to take the pulse of the community. Now that we've gone through the entire study and we've presented our findings, and you all have a better idea of what a historic overlay district means to your community, and how we apply the zoning ordinance for the historic overlay district to the community, which is as we've just gone through and discussed. So now that you all are informed about what this will look like and how it will affect your property moving forward, you can express your opinion through the poll, and the poll results will be reported in the staff report as one element that the Board of Supervisors will use to make their decision.
My issue is that if the supervisor is supposed to listen to us, after all, we elected her. And there's been so much concern over the guidelines, and our inputs have been disregarded because there's something that nobody knew anything about, which is the Department of Interior regulations, that have to be incorporated as part of the guidelines and all this other stuff going on. And yet she continues to insist on this poll, which you all have told us you're not going to listen to anyway. Then I just don't understand the point of this. This is not a mechanism through which we can meaningfully either show dissent or stop the HOD. Because if we're saying, look, we all have concerns, and the answer is, well, regardless, we're going to have this poll. It's a non-binding poll, so if we don't like what you say, if you're not voting the way that we think your neighborhood should be, and my understanding is none of you live here, none of you have invested here. I have lived in this. I haven't lived here continuously, but I've owned in this community since 1993, which is something that none of you can say. Yet you're all forcing me into a vote that you're not willing to be bound by, and I don't understand that.
So the poll is not part of the study process, the Historic Overlay District study process. It was requested by the Civic Association, and so the Civic Association felt that the county was best able to facilitate the poll. So we are doing that on behalf of the Civic Association, and we will report the results back to the community and to the Board of Supervisors. All I can say is that, you have the option not to take the poll. That's fine if that's something that you don't want to do. I recommend that you do take it and express your opinion there, express your opinion to the your supervisor and the Board of Supervisors. And that's really all I can say about that. But it was not it's not part of the HOD study. It was requested by the Civic Association, and we were charged with doing the study. So
I appreciate that you're doing this.
And if I,
of the
I'm
association.
sorry,
But later on, you'll see there are many questions about the integrity of this poll. And I just ask that you all pay attention to that, because to me, that would be a sign of perhaps less than robust confidence in the integrity of this entire process. Sorry, Lily, I interrupted you.
it's okay. I'm sorry I interrupted you as well. I was just gonna add, as Denise mentioned, this is the poll is one of the tools that lets us know, and the board know as well, the consensus of the community. When we get direction from the board to do an analysis, a study of any whether it's a historic overlay district or any other zoning ordinance amendment, for example, our direction is to do the study and bring it to them to make a decision. But in the process of doing the analysis, we're highly encouraged to do outreach, and this is another way of doing outreach in addition to the community meetings we've held. And then again, there will be a public hearing process. That's our process, where we bring what we find and present it to the board, but the board does not make a decision without hearing from the public. I understand for example, from this meeting, there's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of people that do not support the establishment of the HOD. But the board would like to hear from those people that are not in support of the HOD proposal, as well as those people that are in support and weigh it out at the public hearing. And then it's not just the board hearing, there's the planning commission public hearing as well. Coming out to the public hearing may not be feasible for some people. That's why other opportunities are also provided, including the community meetings. The poll helps. I think it would reinforce what you want the board to hear. And then at the public hearing, if people are not able to come to the public hearing as well, we are set up in a hybrid way. It's televised. You can call in. You can send, every property owner can send an email, a letter to the Board of Supervisors, all 10 members, in addition to your Supervisor Penny Gross, and as well as the Planning Commission, to let them know what you feel. But they want to hear from everyone. So that's why there's going to be a public hearing. And if that feedback is received to the board and the planning commission earlier on, we don't know what their decision would be, but we are directed to do the study and bring it to them. We do not have the authority to just say, no, we're not going to do it. I may have simplified it, but I'm just saying this is the process we typically go through in any zoning ordinance amendment. And we want to hear from the community. We're very appreciative of your comments today. It gives us, a very good sense where the community is, but we will take it to the board. But your part in this is also to participate in the poll, make it very clear what you want in the poll, and also if the public hearings are held, if and when we get to that point, also make your concerns heard by sending your emails, by calling in, by coming to the meeting if you can. I just wanted to make it that
Well,
clear.
thank you.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that, and thank you for that encouragement. I just am a little skeptical since you've already scheduled the hearings. It's pretty clear that you said that
Tentative.
hearings will be held in
That-
January,
No.
February, March 2023.
Yes, that's
They're
a tentative timeline based on
tentative
how we
dates.
typically do,
Well,
these
I
kinds of
think that's
studies when we do the
a very
study.
clear intention, right? You've already set dates. So, if this were more, I guess, impartial or more balanced, I don't know that this would already be docketed the way that it is.
So those dates were provided so that the community would know sort of when to be on the lookout for this, that those they are really very tentative dates. No dates have been set at all. We just wanted to give you that information so that you had in your mind when they might be, and you can start looking out for them. So, Mr. Burns, you have your hand up. I'm going to let you speak.
Yes, thank you, Denise. I wanted to correct a comment in the chat. You have to scroll up a ways to see it now. But someone said, to be clear, Holland Hills poll results for 262 yes / 471 eligible parcels equals 55.6%. That is yes results, yes votes of those people who chose to vote. Not all 471 eligible parcels voted in that poll. And so the actual number of people who voted yes in relation to the total number of people who voted in the poll was closer to 70 or 72% is my recollection. So even if you took all of the people who chose not to vote as a negative vote, it still passed 55.6%. So I think that was the comfortable level of support that Supervisor Stork felt that he was in the community's best interest going forward with the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. He took it to the Board of Supervisors. Board of Supervisors agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Burns, for that clarification. So that's another good point, and another reason to vote, because your vote does count.
I do just want to point out that it is 8:59 p.m.
Oh, thank you so much, Grace. Sorry, I lost track of time. Maybe one more question. Is there a question in the chat?
There are many, many questions, but I'll just do the next one in the queue.
Okay.
This is related. This is from Ian Ansley, and it's related to the very first question we got. Is ARB review concurrent with permit review, or if it must go in a specific order, what is the order of the different reviews?
It does not have to go in a specific order. Sometimes we'll get the permit review branch will contact us and say that they're reviewing a permit and it falls in a historic overlay district. And then we contact that the property owner and we let them know that you're in a historic overlay district and then you need to come to the architectural review board. Or sometimes it happens the other way. If you are aware that you're in a historic overlay district and you're looking for a permit for your project, you contact us, the architectural review board, and go in that order. So it's preferable to come to the architectural review board first, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. So it is 9 o'clock, and what I'd like to do is, Grace has mentioned that there are many questions in the chat. What we're going to do is record those questions and sort of group them by topic and try to answer, well, not try, we will answer all of them, and then post our answers online. So that you all can see all of the answers, and we'll be in touch through the Civic Association, their website, and I think you all have a listserv that you're on, and we'll get the information out that way as well. So thank you all so much for your really gracious questions and your civility, and for listening to us, and for your time tonight. And I do please encourage you to take the poll, contact Supervisor Gross, and do participate in the public process and the public hearings, which should come early this spring. But as I said, they're not set yet, so it's a tentative date. So, all right. Well, with that, thank you very much. Thank you to staff. Thank you to all the History Commission members and the ARB members that came out tonight. Really appreciate your time and your support. Take care, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.